What's crappin' fun seekers? It's been a minute. I decided to pop in because I've got to start using my little Toyota truck a lot more, and it's getting dreadfully hot in Florida already. I got to get the air conditioning dialed in on this thing. I've been having trouble with it getting cold enough. I'm going to check everything, so I decided I would take you guys with and show you kind of a comprehensive lesson in automotive air conditioning. And one of the guys I'm doing this for, his name is Timmy Forget, and he has a fantastic YouTube channel. He's a vlogger. He loves square body trucks, old pickups, old cars. He's got a really cool one named Fred. So this is going to be kind of geared towards Timmy and a few other locals here that have asked me air conditioning questions about their vehicles. What you see in this video is going to apply to anything like pre-2000-ish. So that's why I'm kind of big on 80s and 90s cars. You can make them a comfortable, livable, and this will kind of give you a very good breakdown of everything that you need to know. You can get some of the tools that I use on Amazon. I'll try to put links down in the description if I can find kits that make sense for you guys. I don't care about making any money on Amazon. It's not even worth it. But I want you to get good stuff. I want you to get a kit that makes sense if you're going to get the manifold set and the connections and all that stuff. I'll try to drop those down below and some of the chemicals that I used. I got this thing working really good. My name's Jason, and this is Grease Belly Garage. Come on. There we go. Come on, baby. I am not a certified mechanic at all, but I am really good at fixing residential air conditioners, and I've been fixing car air conditioners since I was about 16, and I've done this lots of times in one of the hottest places in the country down here in the west coast of Florida, and I know what I'm talking about. I've been blasted in the comment section before for things that I do. I will tell you what I do and what works for me and what makes people happy with their cars here. We're going to start by a breakdown of how air conditioning works for anybody to understand. The air conditioning system in a car is really not that much different than the cardiopulmonary system in a human body. And what I mean is, in the heart of your cardiopulmonary automotive air conditioning system, you have a compressor, which is driven on the front of the engine. We'll just call this a V8, even though I'm working on a Toyota. You have to forgive my art skills. I didn't pass my final at the Art Institute in Sarasota. This is the heart of the system. And out of the compressor, you've got a fat line. So we'll call that a skinny line. And you've got a fatter line. The skinny line goes up to the front. And in front of your radiator, you've got, we'll call this a radiator. There's the cap. And there's a little safety. In front of your radiator, you've got a condenser. Compressor goes into generally the top of the condenser. A condenser is essentially a radiator, and it's got to have air passing through it with the fan, which is right here on the front of the engine. Or there's two electric fans on the back side of the radiator. One's for cooling the radiator, and when you turn the air on, it usually kicks them both in. And then there are switches that operate those. Otherwise, on your fan, you've either got a direct drive fan, which runs constantly. That's typically in older cars, or you've got what's called a fan clutch. Everybody calls them a clutch fan, which clutch fan is actually the blade, I think. The clutch is a fan clutch, and it's thermal. They have thermal fan clutches and non-thermal. I think non-thermal ones kind of lock up at a predetermined rate, and thermal ones are variable. So as long as all that system is working okay, you don't really have to worry with it too much. But your condenser right here is basically another radiator, and air passes through the front of it when you're either sitting in traffic idling. It has to depend on the fans to do that, or when you're driving, it depends on your lead foot to do that. The heart pumps the blood, which is the refrigerant, under high pressure. This compressor compresses it, a lot like an air compressor compresses air in your shop. The refrigerant gets pumped at a very high pressure. In cars, it's usually around 200 or so. It goes into this condenser. When it goes into here, it's a mixed state of gas and liquid. It goes into the condenser. That turns it back into a liquid. Let's say it comes out of the bottom of the condenser on the same side, in the small line, and it goes up into the dash of your car. Now, on older cars, they had a plenum box out under the hood. Sometimes it would just go straight into here. Otherwise, it goes straight through the firewall, and inside your car, or in this plenum box under the hood, you've got what's called an evaporator, which is another radiator. So we'll call this an evaporator. Then you have another fan. We'll do a little fan in here that blows air across this evaporator. So this connects to here, it atomizes, turns that liquid refrigerant back into a gas. It does that via a metering device, which is going to be somewhere in this general vicinity, right in this area, right in where the scribble is. The metering device is either a TXV or expansion valve, or it's going to be an orifice, or some people call them flow raters. Now, typically, most imported cars, most Chryslers have an expansion valve. Lots of Fords and a lot of GMs had an orifice. One of the tricks in Florida that I do, like an orifice is a fixed atomizer. It's a little hole that refrigerant blasts through it at a very high pressure. And when it goes into the evaporator, the refrigerant expands, kind of like an atomizer perfume bottle. And when it expands, the temperature of that drops, and this fan blowing the heat from inside the car, the heat load, blows across this cool evaporator, and then it continues out through your vents in your car. That vents usually go this way. So once that refrigerant loses or absorbs heat from the interior, air conditioning doesn't really add cold, it removes heat. That's how you have to think about it. It goes back to the compressor, into the fat line. I know this is confusing, but this is location number 1 for evaporator, and this could be number 2 inside the dash. All modern cars since like probably 2000 or so, maybe even 1990, all have the evaporator behind the dash. That's why it's so expensive to fix them, because the evaporator has to be, extracted by removing the entire dash out of the car. Lots of vehicles, they were under the hood, and you could pop them apart and do it all under the hood. Now there's variances. There's rear air, which in case, if that were the case, you'd have another set of lines going to the back of the car over here. So yet another evaporator and another fan. Back over this way. Evaporator and fan. So here's the basic components of the car. All of this has to work in symphony. You've got to have adequate airflow this way through this coil. The fan's got to pull it correctly, or you've got to be going fast enough. This airflow has to be completely unoccluded under the dash, so you've got proper airflow through the vents. Both fan motors have to work, and then your controls, which we'll draw over here, sometimes they're electronic. You've got fan, you've got a temperature control, and you've got a damper to move the air where you want it to go. The damper part, on a lot of older GM cars and Ford cars, they were all vacuum actuators, and they were kind of a pain after a certain age, and you've got to have a good vacuum lead from the engine compartment to make all that function correctly. On a lot of Japanese cars, like Hondas and Toyotas, they were cable actuated, and they never break. Hardly ever do they break unless somebody breaks them deliberately. So you've got to have all this working correctly too. So what can happen in theory is if you've got a control that's broken and it's putting heat out of your vents here, that means that maybe you're getting a heater core, which is also like another evaporator. It's usually up here by the evaporator, and it has coolant lines that go to the engine. We'll get on that another time. But if it's not diverting the air correctly through the evaporator, or closing off the heater control valve or the blend door for the heat, it's going to blow out hot air. Or maybe it is low on Freon, or maybe the compressor's weak. Everything's got to work in symphony. And the really only way to know your baseline diagnosis is that everything has to be clean, and that applies to household air conditioners too. If all the components are functioning, you got fan, compressors functioning, controls are working correctly, the next thing you're going to have to check is occlusion here and occlusion here. Many evaporators are unnecessarily replaced because they're dirty. And sometimes you do have to replace them anyway because they're just too dirty to deal with. You can clean these in place on most cars that I've ever seen. You can clean them in place. It's a little messy. It's a little tricky. Gets me blasted in the comment section. But that's what they do in houses. You can clean them in place, or you can pull them out and clean them. On cars, it's not really as simple as just pulling out and cleaning it. And then in addition to that, on newer cars, you've got filtration. That filtration sometimes works when the air is on recirculate, to recirculate the inside air. And sometimes it works on fresh air, where it draws fresh air in from the vents above your windshield wipers. Sometimes those filters get plugged up, and that's the only problem. So you've got to have correct airflow, correct circulation, correct functioning components. And when all that works in symphony, you're going to have cold air conditioning. From there, you can dial it in a little further. The way that I do that is with the metering devices. I can take these, downsize an orifice, gives it higher atomization, gives it a higher head pressure and atomizes it a little bit quicker. It expands a little bit quicker. Or the TXV, really not a whole lot you can do about those, but you can kind of play with that a little bit with your refrigerant charge. So when I do that, I always rev the engine to 1500 and then set my pressure based on 1500 RPM with both front windows down and the air conditioning on max AC. And that usually gets you pretty close to as cold as you're ever going to get. Now, here's the important thing. A lot of the professional mechanics will weigh in the refrigerant. They'll say it's supposed to have, 23 ounces or whatever. Well, okay, fine. I think that that's just a standardized North America, should function halfway decent, generic load of refrigerant to make it just work. But it doesn't always apply in Florida because we get some unbelievably humid and hot days down here. So that's why I always dial them in and put in what I want. And I do that through pressure. I don't pay any attention to the sticker. Now, if you live in Wisconsin, just weigh it. Just go get a scale or get a couple of cans that equal up to what you need, and you're going to be close enough. If you live in Ohio, fine. If you live in Key West, you need to watch the rest of this video. Now, I've got the glove box popped down on this Toyota truck here. Here's our controls, okay? So I'm going to operate this recirc and fresh. And when I do that, you can see that door right there. That's fresh because it's drawing in air. It closes this door here, draws in air from the cowl vents. That's recirc. It closes off the cowl vents and recirculates the air from inside the cab of the truck. Now, one mistake that people make when they operate air conditioning systems in their car is they have a tendency to leave it on max all the time or recirculate. And that's not good all the time because it can build up quite a bit of moisture inside the box and make things smell and sometimes even make it freeze up. So, and in Toyotas, you can run it in the middle like this. There's even a little detent so you can get both. If you look inside there, you can see the fan motor. I'll go ahead and turn that on. You can see it working. You can see it not working. And that should be clean. You can clean those wheels. This is the damper that diverts it to test events. Bi-level would be here and down below. And by the way, these old Toyotas have a swamp cooler vent also, which is cool. Heat is always the floor because hot air rises, so you want it to blow out on the floor. And then, of course, defrost. Now, on a lot of old 80s cars, and even a lot of the newer ones, they have an independent compressor control. Now, GM didn't really have a lot of that in the 80s. Maybe even the older ones didn't. When you put it on max AC, the compressor was on. This truck You can have it on maximum recirculate ventilation and just turn the compressor off. This lever here blends in. On this particular truck, there's a heater control valve under the hood that opens the water, lets hot water into the heater core. On all newer cars, there's always hot water in the heater core. There's a blend door that closes it off and mixes hot air with cold to make this a variable temperature here. I like this better. I like heater control valves better, even though it kind of has a tendency to make the heater core fail sooner, but you can run that, you know, a few times a year and prevent that. Get some circulation through it. Then of course here's your fan speeds. Sometimes these rheostat switches go bad, or there will be a resistor underneath here by the blower motor. The resistor can go bad. That changes the voltage output to the motor, hence changing the RPM. So you just want to first make sure all this is in pretty good shape and it's all working. All the controls work correctly. So I'm going to take a peek at that evaporator and see what it looks like. This is the box that contains the evaporator. Now, you can clean these in place, and there's two ways to do that. One, pop out the blower motor and peep up in there. Number two, you can do that with a phone, or I've got one of those, what do you call it, borescope things, endoscope things. Number two, you can drill a small hole in this box. Usually in a corner or over here on this side is fine. And you can stick a little rubber hose or some foaming coil cleaner, which I will show you shortly. You can even cut a big hole if you want. People will trash you for it like they did me, but we do, you know, air conditioning guys do this crap on houses all the time. And you just tape it up, put a piece of metal over it. The same thing here. Just tape it up. Nobody's going to look behind the dashboard when they sell, or when you sell your car, and see that you did that. They're not going to say, you're a hack man, you know, go all boomhauer on you. They're just not going to do it. They want the air conditioning to work, and that's it. When this glove box is closed, you can't see this crap anyway. Here's the heart of the system under here. That's the compressor, and you see you've got the two hoses coming out. The smaller line down below is the high pressure. The fatter line up above is the low pressure, which is also vapor line. That's where it goes back to the firewall. The upper one, it goes into the expansion valve and into the evaporator behind the dash. The fat one sucks it back out. That's what the compressor's job is. The compressor pumps this out, and you can see the line goes down and over here to the condenser. Goes into the top of the condenser. And then this condenser is like a radiator, and it's got to be cleared out. On expansion valve systems, you will have one of these. That's a filter dryer. One way to know if you have an expansion valve without being able to see it is if you have a filter dryer up near the condenser in the front of the car, you have an expansion valve. If you have an orifice, you'll have that silver coffee can looking contraption up by the firewall. That's an accumulator. And you've got your fan here. Again, this is a thermal fan clutch. When they're cool, they should spin freely. When they're hot, they should lock up. Sometimes you'll hear older cars, like Chevy Astros, are really bad about that. You could hear that big roaring sound when somebody would take off. That was always the fan clutch doing that. Okay, my major malfunction here is I've got very poor airflow out of my vents. Sorry about the key buzzer. Okay, you can hear that fan on high, but the feeling of the air volume out of these vents is not commensurate with the speed of the blower motor. So my suspicion is that we have a dirty evaporator coil. But I'm going to give you a complete breakdown on how to clean these things in place. Oh, grunting. Okay, a million hours later, got all three screws out, and I got this blower motor out. And of course, I just cleaned this out 4 or 5 months ago, maybe, and there's already leaves that were down in here, and that comes from that fresh air door, recirc door being open and me having filthy, nasty oak trees at my house that I hate. I like the shade, but I hate the leaves. Now we're going to poke a camera up in there, borescope thing, and get a peek at the evaporator, hopefully. Okay, I finally got the camera positioned in there, kind of where I want it. And here's what we're looking at. To my surprise, this evaporator is very, very clean, except for there's one leaf stuck on it. But I'm going to clean this thing anyway. I'm really disappointed that my evaporator wasn't more dirty. And I'm going to feel for the hole back there. And I'm going to stick this up in there. If I don't get a cramp in my arm. I don't even know if it's going in the right spot. Okay, I just basically filled up that entire air box with foam. And you can see on this blower wheel right here, there's a little bit of creepy crud down in some of these fins, I guess they are. Load this thing up a little bit of this foam too, clean it up. Do not spray this in the electrical connectors or inside the motor. See if you can get this thing cleaned up. You want maximum. Well, that stuff's stringy and foamy. That's weird. I found my chip brush that I use for, I don't know, almost everything except my teeth. Sprayed some of that coil cleaner down in there, and it got all that, well, most of that stuff out. You got a little bit right there, which we can see right in there. We'll foam this up again. Like that. Take the brush and kind of angle it back in there a little bit. All right, we look pretty clean now. Now, sometimes you'll see these things and they've got little weights attached to them, and they're factory balanced. This is the original blower motor on this because it's a Toyota, and they usually seem to be pretty balanced. But if you have to replace one of these motors, if you replace a motor, a lot of times you've got to pop this wheel off right here. This one's bolted on. Looks like, yeah. A lot of American cars had a snap ring that held them on there. You got to make sure you don't throw that weight off, or else you'll get that, you know, that kind of thing going on. So I'm going to pop this back in, and I'm going to put the fresh air door to recirculate, because I don't want to suck any more leaves out of the fresh air intake and clog this thing up again with leaves, because I think that must have been the whole problem. Yeah, it's all dry up in there now, it appears. I just loaded that up with foam, and there's another way you can do this too, and I'll show you when I get it back together. Okay, blower motor is reinstalled, and I'm going to pull this glove box down now. Squeeze out these sides. Maybe there. There we go. Let that fall. Okay, now I got the key on. Turn the blower motor on high. Now it's set so it can't suck any outside air, and I don't want it sucking any leaves in. I'm going to take what's left of my can of foam. This is a little bit of a cheat here. You don't want to pull the blower motor out. I'm just going to spray it in this intake. And that fan should suck it in and blow it into the evaporator coil. And that will help clean it off. I was kind of hoping that this would be a lot more dramatic with how dirty it was, but it just wasn't nearly as dirty as I thought it was going to be. I guess these old Toyotas just don't blow that hard. We're running now. Compressor's running. Should feel a little bit of coolness right here, and we do. Should feel some heat right here. It's actually quite a bit. I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and clean this condenser while we're out here as well. I had recently spray painted it, and I may have gotten it dirty or too clogged up when I spray painted it. Now this is nasty stuff here. This is stuff that Laymen's really shouldn't use. You can use the other stuff that I was using inside the cab. This is high foaming coil cleaner. It's for, like residential condensers. It's got to be rinsed off. You don't want to leave this stuff on, but it works really good. This is very caustic, nasty stuff. Not good to breathe. It's like oven cleaner times 10. But I've inhaled so much of it through the years inadvertently that it doesn't bother me like it used to. Can't get it on your skin or your eyes. Be very, very careful if you end up with this brown stuff or the blue one. The reason you want these things to foam is the foam pushes inside of all those fins. And it's supposed to emulsify all the stuff in there. So I try to get it as far into the fins as I can when I do the initial spray. Get it down as far as you can. You're never going to get it perfect unless you just replace the condenser. You can also get blockages in the condenser. The rows go, well, this one looks old school, like an old regular free-flowing one, but like micro-channel ones, the Freon can go in one end, go all the way down, and it goes across in lines. And sometimes you can't tell if there's a blockage in one of those lines. Hope the long guys pick that up. Now, if you live on a dirt road or something like that, or a farm, you got lots of bugs in your area like Florida does, you'd be surprised at how many dead bug carcasses can end up in this thing and occlude that airflow. This actually may have been my fault because I did paint this thing to make it look nice. I probably should have just left it alone. Even though they come painted, but sometimes when you use that thick spray paint, you change the thermodynamic properties of it, I guess. Okay, this is where the professionals chime in and go, hey buddy, you're supposed to blow it through the backside, opposite of the direction the dirt and stuff goes in. But that's an absolute bunch of hooey. I've been doing this for a long time. If air can pass through it, water can get through it. It's just going to push it straight through to the other side. There are coils that you do have to do that with, but not on cars. Not really. So you can just rinse it out. You can do that with radiators. You can do that with evaporators. Very rarely do you have to go from the backside out. And we're not going to do that because you got to take the radiator out to do that and all that. And I'm not doing all that. It's not going to gain anything. You gain nothing by doing all that work except a lot of work. Got the grill back in. The weakest link on these trucks is this grill. It's kind of a hokey way it fastens, so I always use at least one drywall screw to keep it mostly on there anyway. I'm going to fire it back up now, let it dry off that condenser so there's no falsified cooling, and then we're going to try to see if we can't get some of the leaves out of the cowl vent. Well, it's been a couple of days and I just figured out where I left my sunglasses the last time. All this stuff should be dry, and this screwdriver is really hot. That's what happens when you leave your tools out in the sun. Alright, normally you would hook up the high side and the low side, but I don't have the correct fitting on the high side. And you can see we're running, what is that, 55? That's way, way, way too high. The high side's probably pushing 300 because this line down here is just blistering hot. So you can have too much Freon in air conditioning systems and they won't work. They'll work worse than when they're undercharged. So I'm going to get my recovery tank out and extract some of this stuff. Extracted some of the gas. We got it down to between 30 and 35 on the low side. And as you can tell, if you can see that fat line down there, it's got a lot of condensation going on it, overcharged, and that could have been from the leaves and the evaporator and the fan. May have made me inadvertently overcharge it, and that happens sometimes. So what I'm going to do is rev it up to about 1500 and watch my gauge, and I want this gauge to stay, I don't really want it to go below 20. So I may have taken too much out, but we'll see. Alright, so we're hovering around like 15, 17, somewhere in that range. Now as I'm doing this, I've got the driver's door wide open and I've got the air on maximum blow, recirculate. Okay, I've been driving this little Toyota truck around for a few days now, and it has been slowly working better. This vent temperature has gotten down so far to as low as, I don't know, 57 or so, but it's still not quite low enough for moi, yours truly. Now I might need to add some refrigerant, or I might need to check for another heat load. So I've got my brand new residential gauges hooked up here. Make sure they're not leaking everywhere. They're not. Closed off. And we're running here. These gauges say 25 and a little bit below 200. Now that's not really good enough, but this is the first time I've hooked these gauges up. Those over there were saying 10, and I think one said 30. They were both wrong. I trust these a lot more. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit gas to it because this is going a little bit too low for my liking. This is doing okay here. Seems like everything's working okay. And if it is, I'll check the vent temperature, and if that's not right, we'll start looking for a heat load problem. Okay, it almost feels like this truck has an artificial heat load somewhere. Now this in the back is the heater control valve. I'll point to it with my laser thermometer. And it goes through that heater control valve and it's cable actuated. What might be happening is that the heater control valve is allowing water through all the time to the heater core and blending the hot air with the cold air. And on these older cars, that's not supposed to happen that way. The heater valve is supposed to close completely off. So to check that, I'll take my laser thermometer here, my laser beam, and the hose going into the heater control valve is 142, and the hose going out is 141, and the hose coming out of the heater core is 127. So that tells me that I probably have a heater control valve that is not working right or rotted out. And what happens is these valves, the little flapper doodad in there, kind of corrodes and disappears or doesn't seal off right inside of here. This is what allows the hot water to go into the heater core to make hot air. So what's happening is this thing is allowing coolant through to energize, or whatever you want to call it, the heater core constantly. And then the air conditioning is working against the heat load of the heater core. So it doesn't really truly completely shut off. This looks to be the original heater control valve. So what I did is I went to O'Reilly's and bought, this is a Murray 84707 in case anybody wants one. And this is a 84706. One of them is 3/4 inch, one of those 5/8 inch, and these are manual heater control valves. And what I mean by that, I bought both sizes because I use them for other things too, is it's got a hand crank. So you just hook your hoses on either side and you can manually turn this on and off. You can use these in newer cars as well to shut the heater core flow off and make your air conditioning colder. I could even put one of these in that Dodge Durango right there. Probably would make the air conditioner work slightly better. So I'm going to figure out which one of these I need. Looks like it's probably going to be this one. I'm just going to take the original heater control valve out of the circuit, put this in and close it, and that will probably give me maximum cooling capacity for the AC and remove some of the heat load. All right, now we got something. There we go. Okay, it's a few days later. I got that aftermarket heater control valve put in there, but I did order the correct one. Whenever your gauge pressures are correct and you've got not a very good temperature differential, you definitely have a heat load problem from somewhere. This box was put in, this is the evaporator box, and in place of this, when they were built without air conditioning or weren't added yet, there was just a piece of ductwork that went from this blower assembly across to the heater box. This actually has two cables, one that goes outside to the heater control valve, I found this cable floating around loose in here, and then there was a zip tie precariously tied up. Now, do you hear that noise right there? That is a damper that closes off the heater core. When you pull it this way, there's a little rod back here. It's really hard to see. It's right there, it looks like. So when you pull this, it closes off the little door and closes off the heater core. That's been the problem the entire time. Apparently, this thing has been kicked open all the way like that, and it's been allowing hot air through. So I'm going to pull this closed again and maybe figure out some way to attach this zip tie up around here. And then in the wintertime, somebody can just cut it and open that up. This will probably make a drastic difference in our temperature, but it will not correct the airflow problem, which there still clearly is an airflow problem in this truck. So I'm going to yank this box out. I'm just going to check everything and see what's in the heater box, see what's in here. But we've gotten down to the mystery of our temperature control problem. Okay, it's day, I don't know, 400 or so. But on these old Toyotas, you used to be able to buy them without air conditioning, and they would pop AC in for you at the dealer, or Southeast Toyota, or one of the Toyota distribution centers would do it for you. The problem is, when I was trying to clean it without taking it apart, which doesn't always work, is you can see the whole thing's like totally impacted with leaves, which makes perfect sense because my major complaint was airflow. And I'm going to clean this box out. The evaporator is really not dirty. It's just an airflow problem from all the leaves. It also got inside the air heater box too, which I'll show you in a few minutes. See all the leaves in there? So I'm going to clean this out really good. I may go ahead and pop this box apart with a few clips here. And now maybe you can see better. Okay, that's good. Inside of here, there's this little wire or sensor was pulled out like a little thermistor thingy. It was just kind of laying loose in here, but it's supposed to be probably just jammed in this hole in the coil. Okay, here we go. Oh, look at that. I don't know if you guys can see this, but look how disgusting that is. And the drain comes out of this hole right here in the bottom. If you look inside this case, there's no way that was draining. Now, I could have sworn I saw water coming out of there the other day. Make sure you don't get any trash in your fittings down here. In fact, I usually take those off, but I'm not going to do that now. And what you're seeing here is a culmination of what trees do to air conditioners in cars. And a lot of people like trees. I've even got a good friend down here that always parks under trees because it protects the paint, but there's really not much sense in protecting the paint when the tree, particularly oak trees, will just trash everything else. There, then maybe you can see what's going on. See my belly? Here it is. Viper non-rinse evaporator cleaner. This stuff's pretty good too. I always blow that foam down in those fins as deep as I can get it. This is totally unnecessary. I'm just doing this prophylactically because I've got it apart, and it will clean and freshen up this whole situation. Put our clips back on, maybe. Here's where that evaporator case goes. There's the two holes in the firewall. Here's the connectors for everything. Should be able to see them. Oh, see all that? That's a big problem right there. So I'm gonna get the shop vac and suck all that stuff out of there. All right, I got my shop vac stuck up into the intake side of the evaporator box, which will cover the cowling outside for the fresh air. And I'm going to take a blowgun and blow it down in there and try to blow as many of the leaves through into the shop vac as I possibly can. Okay, I basically took my blowgun, blew all in the cowl vent, down in the door jamb as much as I could inside the, where the cowl panel and the fender fit, while simultaneously shop vacuuming from this side. I shop vacked out the heater core side, and see, there's a leaf right there. Oh, got it. Once you get leaves going on stuff, you just can't ever seem to get ahead of them, it appears. Looks like that's pretty clean in there now. So what was happening is when I would turn the air on, the fan motor was blowing all of the leaves that were in the air box and the heater box up against the heater core, and the same thing here, and it was partially restricting the airflow. The problem with that is it will falsify your refrigerant readings. Now, I did not change my expansion valve because I know it was working right based on the readings on the gauges. It's just not necessary to do all that extra work. I also don't like aftermarket parts on Toyotas. I think whenever you can retain original ones, you're way better off. Cinematography sucks here, guys. Okay, evaporator box is all back in now. I took this useless cable and routed it somewhere out of the way, got everything hooked back up. Everything else is working except for that cable was not working. That was a bit of a brain fart on my part. I knew that and I forgot. I cable tie engineered a way to hold it open or closed. That should keep it from opening that heat damper to allow air through the heater core. I think we'll see a drastic improvement at this point. Get all this out of here. And I'll disclose this to whoever buys the truck, that you just have to, in the winter time, you just essentially have to reach down here, cut this one cable tie off, operate it again, and then in the summer, pull it back and re-anchor it, and it'll keep that damper shut, keep the air good and cold like we like it. All right, we got our glove box back together. Got the drain hooked up. Uh-oh. I guess that's all right. Here's just a cheap O-ring kit that I bought at some auto parts store. This is anti-seize. I like to put that on those connections down there, so don't strip the threads on the aluminum part. Look at this. Always do the low side or the gas line first. And I just basically pour a teeny bit of, this is PAG oil, but I've never really noticed any difference between any oils, to be honest with you. We'll put this in here and fully seat it first. Like that. And we'll hopefully start our nut. There it goes. Started nice and smooth. Alright, we'll call that tight. So when we get it snug, grab the wrenches with both hands and snug it up. Like that. I don't know if you can see this or not. I call this stuff Dum Dum. I think you can buy it on Amazon. It's like closed cell tape. It's like tar and tape mixed together. And when you bend this stuff all around, you can seal all your holes in your firewall. And that's basically what this is for in air conditioning systems, to seal up holes around line sets, which is exactly what we're going to do right here. Okay. And you want to smash it down against the pipe and kind of, I don't know, it's like plumber's putty or caulking type stuff. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this grill back off since it's so easy. And I'm going to flush the condenser. And a lot of people say that sucks, or you can't do it, or I'm crazy, or whatever. But I don't really care, because I've done it many times, especially on Toyotas, and it works really well. You usually get a little bit of debris out of there, which surprises me sometimes, but we're going to put some flush solvents in it and then blast air through it and see what comes out of there. Rig myself up a funnel with some of that clear plastic hose I keep laying around everywhere and put it into the output side of the condenser coil. and I'm going to back flush it with flushing solvent. Ace Power flush treatment that I bought at the supply house. You could probably buy it on Amazon, or I think even auto parts stores sell something similar. You can see all this stuff running into the, oh, it's already coming out of the other side of the condenser. That's awesome. Okay, we got the blowgun hooked up to the hose. We're going to put a little bit of air pressure through that, and I put this container over here to hopefully see what's coming out of this condenser. There's the flush solvent, and there's what came out. Now, some of that's refrigerant oil, some of it's compressor guts from the old blown compressor, some of it's probably paint, some of it's probably residue from inside the lines, but that does a pretty good job of cleaning that stuff out of there. Now that flush will dissolve some of the stuff in there that blocks it up. I don't think this one was blocked. I'm just doing this for YouTube garb and to make myself feel better about myself, I guess. So I'm going to put the new O-rings in all these joints and get it all back together, hook my manifold gauges up, and go ahead and hook the vacuum pump up. And sometimes these crank down 134 fittings do not seal off correctly at the fitting, so you can actually be pulling a vacuum and just pulling air right through the high side. So what I did is I took the high side off and just left it off, put a service cap on it on the new port that I installed, tighten that down, and I'm just pulling the low pressure, I'm just pulling the vacuum through the low side, making sure it's tight. Now you can hear my vacuum pump is almost silent. Some guys like to just turn the pump off and watch the gauge, but I don't like to do that on cars because there's too many, well, I don't know. Sometimes there's variables when you do that. So I'm just going to shut the gauge off, the manifold off. We're at 30 inches of mercury. This happened in about 10 minutes. You do not have to pull a car. You don't have to pull a vacuum on a car for an hour, like some people say. That's a big myth as well. So I've got it off, and that needle has not budged a bit. And it probably won't. So I'll usually sit here and watch it for 5 or 10 minutes. And if it does not budge, what I do is I crack the valve back open. And if you hear the least little bit of gurgling in that pump when you crack it open, you probably have a leak. So let's listen for the pump change. Okay, open it back up. The pump didn't change one iota. So we do not have a leak under vacuum anyway. Okay, we've been holding 30 for I don't know how long now, probably an hour. Got new hose clamps, reconnected the original heater control valve because that was not the problem as I suspected. I also used a chemical. This is the best stuff in the whole world right here. It's called Lubidol, and they make another version of it called Freol, or as my mom would say, Lubidol and Freol. It is really, really good stuff. I bought this at O'Reilly's. It's fantastic. It's like the best lubricant I've ever seen, ever. I lubricate everything with this, and it does a really good job, and it lasts a long time. So I lubed up that heater control valve with Freol. And I got a good old-fashioned can of 134a that doesn't have that stupid self-sealing thing in it. Now what I like to do is I like to kind of static charge them first, because there's vacuum in the system. And by the way, that vacuum will eliminate all of that flushing solvent, all moisture. It's all gone with the vacuum. Okay, I got it all charged up. We're running about, I don't know, 35 or so on the low. I can't hook up the high side because that fitting hits the compressor, so I'll have to get an extension for it. If I had to guess, it's probably around 200 by touching that. Our vapor line is nice and cold down there. Sounds good. Well, it's been a few days of driving this little truck around with all the things that I figured out. This was a very complicated air conditioning case. Ultimately, what's happened now is I can drive it without sweating. It feels comfortable, but the temperature drops when you're going down the road. So I'm going to go ahead and replace parts that I suspected for a long time. I'm going to go ahead and put a new condenser in it, and I'm going to put a new fan clutch in it, because I think what's happening is that old micro channel condenser
I was wrong. I thought it was a free flow, but it's a micro channel. The fingers that go across this way, I think a couple of those rows are blocked off, and that was kind of suspect when not all that flush solvent, when it overflowed that condenser so quickly, it just seemed like it didn't have a lot of volumetric thing going on with the refrigerant. All the parts on this truck are 39 years old, so it doesn't surprise me a bit. So I just wanted to drop in and make a video about automotive air conditioning when you get into these old cars like this and you want to make them cold and tolerable. The other thing about this truck is it's got a tremendous heat load. It's an old uninsulated tin can. We're in Florida. I think it's like 90 degrees today. The humidity is a little bit higher than it has been. It's noisy in here. You know, it's just got a lot working against it, so it's not going to be as efficient. I guess I should have known better and just started replacing parts right out of the gate. Usually I do, but I'm cheap by nature, so when you do your own diagnostics, I hope something in this video will help you diagnose the things, but you might as well plan on, as a general rule of thumb, and I usually do this, if you put a new compressor in, go ahead and throw a condenser in. You might as well. You've got the system open. Orifices have filters that can plug up. Just put an orifice in. Replace your filter dryer, replace your accumulator if you have those items. If your evaporator doesn't leak, you're typically okay to rerun that, but make sure it's clean. And also, I got thrown off by the controls in this truck because I had two heater control cables, one for the damper for the heater core, the other one for the heater valve. So, you know, there's all kinds of things, and even with me doing this for, I don't know, 35 years, it can trip you up a little bit. I'm gonna drive this truck for a couple of months. It should work good enough with all that to let me drive it comfortably, get it sold. I've got another truck to replace this with, and I've got my Ford Excursion coming up soon. So that's it for now. I hope if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs up anyways and pay it forward. And I will most certainly catch you guys on the flip side.
See you next time.
All right.
Tune in again.
Thanks for watching.
Yep.